The rain fell heavily outside, while Claire tried to stay focused on the task of preparing a simple soup for Emma. Her trembling hands could barely hold the knife. Sweat dripped down her pale forehead, despite the cold on that stormy afternoon. The fever that had been consuming her for days seemed to get worse by the minute, but she insisted on taking care of her 5-year-old daughter. "Honey, please go to the living room. I'll finish this quickly, and then we can eat together. The rain will soon stop and tomorrow we'll be better," said Claire, trying to force a smile that couldn't hide the pain she felt in every part of her body. Emma, with her big eyes full of concern, watched every unstable movement of her mother. Her small hand firmly clutched the worn cloth doll, the only gift she had received on her last birthday, made by Claire's own hands. The girl had never seen her mother so weak, so different from the strong woman she knew, and this frightened her more than any storm. "Mommy, you're shaking too much. Let me do it." "The teacher said I'm big enough to help," insisted Emma, standing on her tiptoes trying to reach the knife that seemed too heavy in Claire's hands. A lightning bolt illuminated the kitchen, revealing Claire's haggard face, marked by deep dark circles and lips dried by fever. She felt a sudden dizziness, stronger than the previous ones, and had to support herself on the edge of the sink to avoid falling. The world around her began to spin, and Emma's distant voices sounded as if they were underwater. "No, my love, you're too." Claire couldn't finish the sentence. A blurry veil covered her eyes, the knife slipped from her trembling fingers and fell to the floor. In the next second, her body, consumed by fever and exhaustion, collapsed beside it as if all life had suddenly escaped. Emma was paralyzed for a moment that seemed like an eternity. The scene of her mother falling before her small eyes seemed unreal, like in the nightmares that sometimes woke her in the middle of the night. The impact of Claire's body against the floor finally awakened the girl from her momentary trance, making her react with the pure desperation of a child who sees her only safe harbor crumbling. "Mommy! Mommy, wake up! Please don't leave me alone!" shouted Emma, kneeling beside her mother and shaking her motionless body with all the strength her small hands allowed. A deafening thunder answered Emma's desperate cries. The girl looked at her mother's pale face, so different from the animated countenance that used to tell stories and sing lullabies. Claire's lips were bluish, and her breathing was so weak that Emma could barely perceive it. Her primitive fear took over the child, the fear of loss, of loneliness, of abandonment. "Mommy said that in emergencies I should call the numbers she taught me. This is an emergency, the biggest of all." "I have to be brave now," Emma muttered to herself, trying to remember exactly what to do while tears blurred her vision. Emma ran to the phone, her small hands trembling uncontrollably as she tried to remember the exact sequence of numbers that her mother had made her memorize through a simple song. Fear threatened to paralyze her mind, but the image of her mother lying on the kitchen floor propelled her to continue. 911, like the song. 911, help for Mommy. "Please someone come help my mommy," Emma repeated to herself like a desperate mantra, while her little fingers pressed the phone buttons. Emma's hands were shaking so much that she dialed the numbers wrong twice before managing to complete the call correctly. The operator's voice sounded distant and formal, asking for information that the girl barely understood in her state of panic. Where did they live? What was her mother's full name? What had happened? Emma answered as best she could, sobbing between words and begging them to come quickly because her mommy wouldn't wake up anymore. "Please come quickly. My mommy fell to the floor and won't wake up. She's very hot and her mouth is blue. I'm so afraid she'll go away forever," explained Emma, with a voice broken by sobs, the words coming out in an anguished torrent. After hanging up the phone, Emma ran back to her mother's side. The girl knelt again, her childish heart beating so hard it seemed to want to escape from her chest. With trembling hands, she touched her mother's face, feeling the frightening heat of the fever. Claire's closed eyes, her motionless eyelids, caused an indescribable terror in Emma. "Mommy, I called for help. They're coming soon. Please don't go away. Who's going to take me to school? Who's going to tell me stories before bed? Please, Mommy, I need you," Emma pleaded, tears falling on Claire's face as the girl leaned over her. With each passing minute, Emma's desperation grew. Claire's breathing became shallower, and her face grew even paler, taking on a grayish color that contrasted with the feverish flush from before. Emma held her mother's hand, squeezing it as if through this contact she could transfer her own life into Claire's weakened body. "Mommy, you promised you'd never leave me alone. Remember when Daddy left? You said it would always be the two of us against the world. You can't break that promise, Mummy." "You never break promises," said Emma, her childish voice carrying an adult pain, a precocious knowledge of life's fragility. Minutes that seemed like hours passed, until finally the sound of a siren began to distinguish itself among the noise of the storm. Emma felt a wave of relief course through her small body as she recognized that sound. Hope was reborn in her heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, it wasn't too late for her mother. "It's okay, Mommy, they've arrived to help you. I was strong like you always taught me. Now they have to make you better so we can be together again," whispered Emma, firmly holding Claire's cold hand while tears continued to stream down her childish face. The door was opened urgently and 2 paramedics quickly entered. Emma stood up immediately, frantically waving and guiding them to the kitchen where her mother remained fallen. The paramedics worked quickly and efficiently, checking Claire's vital signs and exchanging terms that Emma didn't understand, but whose grave tone made her stomach tighten. "Will she be okay? Please, make my mommy wake up. Did I do everything right?" "I called the emergency number like she taught me," asked Emma, her large eyes fixed on the paramedics' movements, searching for any sign that her mother would be safe. However, the girl received no answer, and from what she saw in the paramedics' faces, it seemed her mother would not get better, which made tears blur the girl's eyes. The journey to the hospital seemed to last an eternity for Emma. Sitting on the ambulance bench, hugging her cloth doll, the girl observed with wide eyes the strange equipment connected to her mother. The serious expression of the paramedics, the constant beeping of the machines, the quick movement of hands checking tubes and monitors, everything indicated that the situation was grave, much more serious than Emma could comprehend. "Mommy always takes care of me when I'm sick. She stays up all night if I have a fever. Now it's my turn to take care of her. Please, let me stay close. She needs to know she's not alone," Emma begged the paramedic who was trying to keep her seated on the bench. At the hospital, everything happened very quickly. Claire was taken inside on a stretcher, while Emma ran alongside, trying to keep pace with her short legs. The sound of loud voices, orders being given, equipment being moved, created a chaotic symphony of emergency that further increased Emma's fear. She realized, even with her limited understanding, that her mother was being treated as an urgent case, which meant she could really. No, Emma couldn't even complete that thought. "Please, don't let go of my mommy's hand. She's sick. She always holds my hand when I have nightmares. Now she needs someone to hold hers," Emma asked a nurse who was gently trying to prevent her from entering an examination room. For what seemed like hours, Emma waited, hugging her cloth doll. Her eyes never left the doors through which they had taken her mother, as if her constant vigilance could somehow keep Claire alive. In her childish mind, terrible images formed. Her mother never opening her eyes again, never smiling again, never doing her hair or singing to her again. The possibility of losing her mother was as incomprehensible as it was terrifying. "Heavenly Father, if Mommy wakes up, I promise I'll never complain about eating vegetables again. I'll make my bed every day and never cry when she has to work late. If God lets my mommy stay with me, I'll be the best daughter in the world," Emma murmured, joining her small hands before her chest in a timid gesture of prayer, desperately negotiating with fate in the only way a 5-year-old could understand. Finally, a doctor with a tired face and grave expression approached Emma. He knelt down to be at the girl's height, his eyes reflecting a mixture of compassion and concern that made Emma's heart tighten even more. The doctor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with having to deliver such serious news to such a small child. "Your mommy is very sick, little one. She has a very strong infection in her body that's making her get weaker and weaker. If she doesn't receive a special medication in the next 60 minutes, I'm afraid she might go to sleep forever. Do you understand what that means? That's why I need you to tell me if there's anyone, any relative who can help us make her better. Do you understand what I'm saying?" asked the doctor, his soft voice betraying the seriousness of the situation. The doctor's words hit Emma like a physical blow. Sleep forever. She knew this euphemism. She had heard adults use it to explain to children where a classmate's grandfather had gone, or what had happened to a pet that would never return. It meant going to live in heaven. It meant never seeing her mother again. It meant being completely alone in the world. No, my mommy can't sleep forever. She promised to take me to the park when she got better. She promised we would look at the stars together when the rain stopped. Please, doctor, do something. We don't have anyone. Dad left. We don't have anyone else. It's just me and her. Emma begged, clutching the doctor's coat desperately, as if he personally could prevent death from taking her mother. The doctor explained that the medication Claire needed cost $22. Such a small amount, so insignificant to many, but now representing the difference between life and death for Claire. Emma put her hands in the small pockets of her dress, showing she had no money, a gesture that made the doctor's heart clench. The cruelty of the situation, a life depending on such a paltry sum, was evident in his sad gaze. I don't have any money, doctor. I only have my doll. Please give her the medicine now, and I promise we'll bring the money as soon as she gets better. Mommy taught me that we should always pay what we owe. I can work. I'll do anything to save my mommy, negotiated Emma, using the simple and direct logic of a child. With a heavy sigh, the doctor explained that even though it was a small amount, the hospital could no longer provide free medications. The hospital pharmacy required advance payment for any item, even for the most basic and inexpensive medications. It was a strict rule implemented after recent budget cuts, and which now placed a literal price on Claire's life. I'm sorry, little one, I really am. If I could change the rules, I would, but I can't. If I give you the money, I could lose my job. We need you to have the money to get the medication from the pharmacy. Are you sure there's no one who can help you? Not even a neighbor? A friend? Confessed the doctor, his frustration evident. Emma looked at her cloth doll, her only treasure. The doll that her mother had made with such care, using colorful scraps and stuffing from an old pillow. The doll that slept with her every night, that wiped away her tears when she was sad, that shared her joys when everything was fine. Now, this object of comfort needed to transform into salvation. Doctor, please let me see my mommy one last time before I go. I need to tell her that I will get help. I need to promise her that I'll be back soon, asked Emma, her small voice carrying a surprising determination for someone so young. The doctor led Emma to the room where Claire was. The sight of her mother, normally so vibrant, now pale and motionless in a hospital bed, connected to machines that monitored her increasingly weak vital signs, was almost unbearable for Emma. The beeps of the heart monitor seemed slower and more distant with each second, as if life was slowly escaping from Claire. Mommy, it's me, Emma. The doctor said you need medicine to get better, but it costs $22 and we don't have it. But don't worry, I'm going to get that money. I'm going to sell my doll. I know you made it for me with a lot of love, but I'm sure you would understand. I can live without a doll, but not without you, Emma whispered in Claire's ear. The clock on the wall of the room showed 2 in the afternoon. Each tick-tock seemed like a cruel reminder of time running out. For Emma, the sound of the clock mixed with the beep of the heart monitor, creating a macabre countdown for her mother's life. The doctor, watching from the door, noticed that Claire's vital signs continued to slowly deteriorate. With a final kiss on her mother's hot forehead, Emma firmly pressed her doll against her chest. This was the necessary sacrifice, the only thing of value she possessed. With courage born of desperation and love, Emma moved away from the bed and walked toward the door, each step laden with the weight of her impossible mission. I'll be back soon, Mom. I promise I'll get your medicine. You've always taken care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of you, declared Emma, her small voice carrying an unshakable determination. Before the doctor could stop her, Emma ran down the corridor toward the exit. The clock continued its relentless march. Only 60 minutes separated her mother from life and death. 60 minutes for a 5-year-old girl to find $22 in a world that until now had only shown her indifference. 60 minutes to accomplish the impossible for love. The girl didn't understand if that amount was very small or very large. She had little notion of values, but a certainty in her heart and an unshakable faith. I'll find someone with a good heart. Mom always says there are good people in the world, even when it's hard to believe. Today I need to find one of them before it's too late, thought Emma, clutching her doll tightly as she ran into the rain, carrying with her the only hope of saving her mother. Emma ran out of the hospital, her little bare feet immediately soaked as they stepped in the puddles forming on the asphalt. Holding her cloth doll firmly against her chest, she looked both ways down the street, trying to decide where to go. The streets near the hospital were busy, people hurrying back and forth, all apparently with important places to go, their own problems to solve. The girl took a deep breath and ran toward the main avenue, where she saw more people sheltering under the store marquees. "Mom's going to be okay, I promise." "I'll find someone good who will buy you and save Mom," Emma whispered to her doll, as if the small cloth object could understand the sacrifice they were both about to make. Upon reaching the main avenue, Emma was immediately struck by the reality of the big city. The intense movement, the noise of cars, the accelerated rhythm of people who barely noticed one another, much less a small 5-year-old girl. Her soaked dress clung to her thin body, her hair dripped water onto her face already marked by tears, but none of that mattered. The clock in her heart continued to mark time relentlessly, each second bringing her closer to the moment when she could lose her mother forever. With determination that defied her age, Emma approached a group of people sheltering under the marquee of a clothing store. "Please, can someone buy my doll? My mom is very sick in the hospital and needs medicine that costs $22. "It's the only way to save her?" asked Emma, her trembling voice barely audible above the noise of the busy street. The people under the marquee briefly looked at the soaked girl, but quickly averted their gaze, as if the sight of such a small and desperate child was too uncomfortable to face for more than a few seconds. Nobody responded. Nobody made any movement toward her. It was as if Emma were invisible, or worse, as if she were merely an inconvenience, something unpleasant to be ignored until it disappeared on its own. The girl felt her heart sink, but the image of her mother lying in that hospital bed drove her to continue. "It's a very special doll. My mom made it with her own hands. It's a little old, but it has a hand-sewn dress and a smile that doesn't come off even when we wash it. Please, can someone help me?" insisted Emma, moving closer to the people, her voice now a little louder, laden with desperation. An elegant woman, dressed in expensive clothes and carrying several shopping bags, looked at Emma with evident irritation. Her face, impeccably made up, contorted into an expression of disdain that made the girl instinctively back away. The woman stepped to the side, as if wanting to increase the distance between her and the wet child. Her cold eyes examined Emma from top to bottom, pausing with particular disgust on the girl's dirty bare feet. "Get out of here, dirty beggar." "I'm not interested in buying filthy rags." "Go beg somewhere else and leave decent people in peace," snapped the woman, making a gesture of repulsion with her hand, as if shooing away a particularly unpleasant insect. Emma felt the words like a slap. Never before had she been called a beggar. Never had she been treated as if her mere presence was offensive. Her mother had always kept her clean and well cared for, even in the most difficult times. Now soaked by the rain and desperate, she suddenly saw herself through that woman's eyes, a dirty, barefoot child begging in the streets. Shame burned on her face along with tears, but necessity was greater than wounded pride. "I'm just trying to help my mommy who is very sick. The doctor said she needs the medicine in an hour, or she will sleep forever," explained Emma, her voice increasingly choked with crying, as she extended the doll a little further. Another woman, who observed the scene with a mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity, leaned toward her shopping companion, speaking loud enough for Emma to hear clearly. "Children like this should be in an orphanage. Probably the mother is a drug addict or alcoholic. It's absurd to let children wander alone through the streets, manipulating decent people with sad stories." The two laughed discreetly, as if sharing a particularly witty joke. "My mommy is not a drug addict. She works hard and now she's sick in the hospital." "The doctor said she needs the medicine or she'll die," protested Emma, her childish voice rising in defense of her mother, even without fully understanding the meaning of the accusations. Tears now ran freely down Emma's face, mixing with the rainwater. She moved away from the cruel women and ran to another group of people ahead, at the entrance of a department store. Time continued to pass mercilessly, and with each rejection, hope diminished a little more. But Emma couldn't give up. Her mother only had her in the world, and she only had her mother. She timidly approached a gentleman who seemed less intimidating than the others, offering her precious doll again. "Please, sir, Could you buy my doll for $22? It's to buy medicine for my mommy who is very sick, she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the cold that was beginning to take over her small body. Before the man could respond, a uniformed security guard from the store approached quickly. His severe face and rigid posture made it clear he wasn't there to help. He looked at Emma with the same kind of irritation reserved for unwanted urban pests. Without any gentleness, he grabbed the girl's arm, taking her to the sidewalk. You're scaring customers away with that filthy doll. How many times do I have to expel children like you from this entrance? Go beg somewhere else before I call the authorities, threatened the security guard, practically dragging Emma away from the store entrance. Frightened, Emma pulled her arm and took a few steps back, almost falling in the process. Her heart beat rapidly, not just from fear of the intimidating security guard, but from the growing dread that perhaps she wouldn't be able to save her mother. What kind of world was this where nobody cared about a desperate child or a dying mother? The girl looked all around, desperately searching for any sign of compassion among the crowd of indifferent faces. Mommy always says there are good people everywhere. Where are they today? Why doesn't anyone want to help me? Please, someone has to listen, Emma muttered to herself, clutching her doll as if it were a talisman. Still, she continued her desperate search, now approaching a group of teenagers who were chatting animatedly under a coffee shop awning. Maybe young people would have more compassion, Emma thought. Maybe they could pool the money among themselves, since each would only need to contribute a few dollars. Please, can you help me? I need to sell my doll to buy medicine for my mother in the hospital. She'll die if she doesn't get the medicine soon, begged Emma, her voice almost disappearing from exhaustion. The teenagers interrupted their conversation and looked at the small figure before them. For a brief moment, Emma saw something like recognition in their eyes, as if for a second they really saw her as a frightened and desperate child. But then one of them laughed, and like a wave, the laughter spread through the group. They pointed at Emma, at her soaked dress, at her dirty bare feet, at her faded cloth doll. Look, even her doll is cleaner than she is, mocked one of them, provoking more laughter. That doll looks like a dead rat. Who would want to buy that? Emma backed away, hurt by the cruel words. Her doll wasn't ugly. It was the most beautiful treasure she possessed, made with love by her mother's hands. How could they mock something so precious? How could they laugh when her mother was dying? Tears ran down Emma's face, but she tried once more, approaching the teenager who seemed less cruel than the others. Please, it's true. My mommy is very sick. I just need $22. It's very little. You can split it among yourselves, pleaded Emma, extending the trembling doll in her small hands. The teenager seemed to hesitate for a moment. He stepped forward, extending his hand as if to take the doll or perhaps offer money. Emma's heart raced with momentary hope. Finally, someone was listening to her. Finally, someone would help. She moved closer anxiously, a smile of relief beginning to form on her wet face. I can't believe you were going to touch that disgusting thing, exclaimed a girl from the group, pulling the boy's arm. Just look at her, she's probably full of diseases and lice. The boy immediately backed away, as if awakened from a trance. His face, momentarily open, closed again with a mask of disdain. He made an exaggerated gesture of disgust, wiping his hand on his pants as if he had touched something contaminated, provoking more laughter from the group. Emma stood still, her hand still extended with the doll, while the teenagers walked away, still laughing and occasionally looking back to mock her a bit more. I don't have lice. Mommy always washes my hair, and my doll is clean, I promise. Why are you so mean to me? Whispered Emma, her voice almost inaudible beneath the noise of the city. The rejection from the teenagers was particularly painful. If not even they, who seemed more approachable than the hurried adults, could help her. Who could? Emma looked at the sky, which was beginning to lighten slightly between the clouds. How much time had passed since she left the hospital? Her mother's life was draining away with each minute, and Emma felt increasingly powerless to prevent this irreparable loss. Heavenly Father, if you're listening, please help. I'm trying so hard, but nobody wants to help me. Don't let my mommy die, please, I beg you. Please, we don't have much time, I know that. I feel that she'll go to live in heaven if I take too long. I beg you, let me stay with my mommy, murmured Emma, her childish faith being her last anchor in a sea of despair. Physically and emotionally exhausted, Emma dragged herself to the steps of a nearby church. The old and imposing building seemed more welcoming than the hostile streets. Perhaps there, in God's house, she could find some comfort, or maybe someone entering or leaving the church would have a heart more open to her plea. She remembered her mother saying that God always used those most in need, and that sometimes Jesus disguised himself as those who needed help to test people's kindness. She hoped that there someone would help her, but she knew her time was running out. So Emma sat on the cold, damp stone steps, hugging her doll tightly. Her small body trembled uncontrollably, both from the cold and from the growing fear that she had failed, that her mother would leave this world and leave her completely alone. "I can't give up, Mommy. I know you would never give up on me. I'll try once more, I promise. Someone has to hear me, someone has to help," Emma said to her doll, as if the small cloth object could transmit the message to her distant mother. Taking advantage of being in front of the church, Emma joined her little hands and made a desperate prayer, the most sincere that her childish heart could offer. She closed her eyes tightly, concentrating on each word as if her intensity could ensure they would be heard in heaven. Tears continued to run down her face, marking clean trails in the dirt left by the rain. "Please, dear God, help my Mommy. I promise to be good forever, promise never to disobey again, never to complain about eating vegetables, never to forget to make my bed. I'll do anything you ask, but please don't let my Mommy die," pleaded Emma, her voice choked with crying. At that exact moment, as if in response to her desperate prayer, she heard firm footsteps approaching and a loud, authoritative voice cutting through the air. A man elegantly dressed in an expensive suit was passing by the church sidewalk, speaking energetically on his cell phone. He gestured with his free hand, apparently discussing an important business. Words like millions and contract reached Emma's ears, although she did not understand their meaning. The man seemed so different from the people she knew, his impeccable suit, his shiny shoes, his air of confidence and power. "I don't care what he offered. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar deal here. Tell him I won't accept less than the initially agreed amount. If he wants to renegotiate, he can come talk to me personally," the man was saying on the phone, his deep and decisive voice echoing on the almost empty staircase. Emma saw in him her last hope. Someone who spoke of millions could certainly spare $22 to save a person's life. Gathering her last strength, she stood up, descended the steps and took a few hesitant steps toward the man, holding her doll in front of her as an offering. Her mouth opened to speak, but before any sound could come out, the man, completely absorbed in his important phone conversation and not noticing the small figure in his path, bumped into her with enough force to unbalance her. "I'll be at the office in 20 minutes and we'll resolve this in person. I won't accept any more excuses," the man continued on the phone without even realizing what had happened. The impact caused Emma to stagger backward, losing her balance on her tired feet, numb from cold. More importantly, the shock made the doll, her only treasure and last hope, escape from her hands and fall directly into a puddle of dirty mud that had formed at the foot of the staircase. Emma watched in horror as her precious doll partially sank into the dark mud, the colorful little dress that her mother had sewn with so much love now unrecognizable under the layer of dirt. "No, no, my doll, my only chance," cried Emma, falling to her knees beside the muddy puddle, her small hands desperately trying to recover her ruined treasure. The doll she now pulled from the mud was soaked and covered in dirt. What was once a humble but loving object now looked like just an unrecognizable rag. Who would buy this now? Who would give $22 for something that looked like it had been pulled from the trash? Emma looked up at the sky that continued to brighten, and then at the clock on the church tower. The sky was already a bit darker. Only a few minutes remained to get the money and return to the hospital. And now, with her doll ruined, she had absolutely nothing to offer in exchange. "This was my only chance and I lost it. I'm going to lose my Mommy. I won't make it," she stammered in desperate tears, her voice barely coming out amid the sobs that shook her small body. While trying to wipe away the tears with the backs of her dirty hands, something caught Emma's attention. A wallet. In the confusion of the moment, with the pain of seeing her doll ruined, she hadn't noticed anything, just the toy that had fallen. Now, however, it was clearly visible against the grey of the wet sidewalk. An elegant leather wallet, apparently expensive, just like everything related to that hurried man who continued walking, without even stopping to see what he had bumped into. Emma looked around quickly. No one else seemed to have noticed the fallen wallet. The man was still walking and talking on the phone, completely unaware of what he had lost. He dropped his wallet when he bumped into me. He didn't even notice, so busy talking about his millions, thought Emma, her eyes going from the wallet to the figure of the man walking away and then back to the wallet. With trembling hands, still holding the muddy doll with one arm, Emma picked up the wallet from the ground. It was heavy, made of soft leather that felt extremely expensive to the touch. With hesitant fingers, she took the object and immediately her eyes widened in shock. Inside were several bills, many of high value, meticulously organized in elegant compartments. There was so much money there that Emma, in her limited experience, could barely comprehend the total amount. It was certainly much more than the $22 she desperately needed to save her mother. There's so much money here. More than I need to save Mommy. He probably wouldn't even miss so little. He was talking about millions on the phone. $22 means nothing to him, Emma whispered to herself, her childish mind. For an instant, just a brief moment that seemed to extend indefinitely, the thought of simply taking what she needed and running to the hospital to save her mother. It would be so easy. The man probably wouldn't even notice a few missing bills among so many. She could have the money in her hands right now, without having to beg, without having to endure more humiliations or rejections. Her mother would be saved, and no one would need to know. Her small fingers lightly touched the bills, feeling the texture of the paper that could mean the difference between Claire's life and death. He had so much, and she needed so little. I can't do this. Mommy always says we should do the right thing even when it's hard. What kind of daughter would I be if I saved her by stealing, thought Emma, the voice of her conscience sounding incredibly similar to her mother's. The internal struggle lasted only seconds, but to Emma it seemed an eternity. Her mother had always taught her the values of honesty and integrity, even when they lived in such precarious conditions that a complete meal was cause for celebration. What we have that is most valuable is our dignity, Emma, Claire used to say. When we lose that, we lose everything. Could Emma dishonor these teachings, precisely at the moment when she was trying to save the person who had planted them in her heart? If I take this money without permission, even if it's to save Mom, I'll be betraying everything she taught me. She would be sad with me even if it saved her, Emma concluded, firmly closing the wallet as if to push away the temptation. With a decision that defied her age and the desperate situation in which she found herself, Emma rose, still holding the soaked doll in one arm and the wallet in the other. The man was quite far away now, almost disappearing around the next corner. If she didn't act quickly, he would vanish completely. "Sir, sir, wait please!" shouted Emma with all the strength her small lungs allowed, running after the man, her bare feet hardly feeling the cold of the wet sidewalk in her desperate hurry. The man continued walking, apparently deaf to the girl's cries. Emma ran faster, ignoring the exhaustion that weighed on her body after the frustrated attempts to sell her doll. Her feet slipped on the wet sidewalk, almost making her fall, but she recovered quickly, determined to reach him. Finally, when he was about to turn the corner, the man seemed to finally hear the persistent shouts. He turned around, the cell phone still glued to his ear, an expression of irritation beginning to form on his face at being interrupted in his important conversation. "Sir! Sir! You dropped this when you bumped into me," said Emma breathlessly, extending the wallet with a trembling hand when she finally reached him. Ryan was momentarily speechless. He instinctively ran his hand over the inside pocket of his suit jacket, where he normally kept his wallet, noting with surprise that it really wasn't there. Quickly muttering, "I'll call you back in 5 minutes," into the phone, he hung up and looked with perplexity at the small figure before him. A tiny girl, soaked, barefoot, holding a ruined doll and his expensive wallet. You're returning my wallet?" asked Ryan, unable to hide the surprise in his voice as he took the object from Emma's small, dirty hands. Emma nodded seriously, her large, teary eyes meeting his. Ryan quickly opened the wallet, checking its contents with experienced fingers. Everything was there, the credit cards, documents, and, most importantly, the various high-value notes he was carrying for a transaction he would make later. Not a penny had been touched. The man looked at the girl again, truly seeing her for the first time. Her bare feet, the soaked and dirty dress, the face marked by tears and dirt, and especially those eyes. Eyes that, despite all the visible despair in them, still maintained a surprising dignity. "Thank you for returning my wallet." "Many people would have simply kept it," said Ryan, his tone subtly shifting from surprise to something closer to genuine gratitude. Emma just continued looking at him, pressing her muddy doll against her chest as if it were her last link to hope. Her honesty, in such obviously desperate circumstances, touched something deep in Ryan. He was an experienced businessman, accustomed to dealing with people who lied, cheated, and stole for much less than survival. Seeing such a small and clearly needy child choose honesty when no one was watching was something that challenged his cynical understanding of the world. "Are you okay, little one? Why are you crying? And what happened to your doll?" asked Ryan, lowering himself a bit to be closer to the girl's height, noticing now that the doll was covered in mud. The kind words, the first that Emma had heard in hours of rejection, almost broke the last reserves of her composure. The girl's lips trembled, a sob escaped her throat, and fresh tears began to stream down her already stained face. She tried to speak, but a sob escaped first. Ryan waited patiently, something rare for a man who valued every second of his time as if it were literal money. "My mommy is very sick in the hospital. The doctor said she needs a medicine that costs $22, or she'll sleep forever. I tried to sell my doll to get the money, but nobody wanted to buy it. Then you bumped into me and it fell in the mud. Now I won't be able to sell it anymore, and my mommy will go to heaven," explained Emma between sobs, her childish voice laden with a despair that didn't match her age. Ryan felt something strange in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced for a long time. It was as if ice he didn't even know existed there was slowly beginning to melt. $22. Such an absurdly small amount for him who spent more than that on a single cup of specialty coffee every morning. $22 separating a child from becoming completely orphaned in the world. The disproportion between the problem and its solution was almost surreal in its simplicity. Your mother is sick and needs medicine that costs $22. "And you were trying to sell your doll to get this money?" asked Ryan, just to confirm the unbelievable story, while his fingers unconsciously caressed the soft leather of the wallet that could have easily been stolen by this same desperate child. Emma nodded vigorously, relieved that someone was finally listening to her story, really listening. Her small hands held the doll a little further away from her body, showing the damage the mud had caused to what was once a humble toy. The doll's button eyes, almost covered by dirt, seemed to plead as much as the girl's. "Mommy made this doll for me on my birthday. It was the only thing I had to sell. Now it's ruined, and I have no way to get the money for the medicine." "Sorry, I'm not speaking right, sir. I'm very afraid of losing my mommy," explained Emma, her voice trembling with the effort of holding back sobs to make herself understood. Ryan observed the ruined doll in the small, trembling hands. A feeling of guilt washed over him. He had been the direct cause of the destruction of the only object that could have saved this child's mother. In his hurry, in his self-attributed importance, he hadn't even noticed what he had bumped into. How many other lives had he negatively impacted in his blind race for success? How many other Emmas had been left behind in his path, invisible to his eyes, focused only on numbers, contracts, and profits? "How long has your mother been in the hospital? And how much time do you have to get this medicine?" asked Ryan, suddenly aware that he might be facing a truly urgent situation. Emma anxiously looked at a clock tower visible a few blocks away. Her small lips pressed together in an expression of anguish as she realized that more time had passed than she had imagined. The doctor had said 1 hour, and she had already spent almost all that time in frustrated attempts to sell her doll. "The doctor said Mommy needs the medicine in 1 hour, or it will be too late. That was a little after the clock was at 2. I tried to sell my doll, but nobody wanted to buy it. Now it's dirty, and the clock is close to number 3. I think time is running out, and I," responded Emma, unable to complete the sentence due to the sobs shaking her small body. Ryan looked at his expensive wristwatch. It showed 2:55 in the afternoon. If what the girl was saying was true, only 20 minutes remained to get the medication and administer it to her mother. 20 minutes separating life and death. He raised his eyes and spotted the hospital at the end of the street, not very far from where they were. The story was beginning to make sense in its geographical plausibility. From there, he could see the ambulances parked at the emergency entrance, the movement of people entering and leaving the building. "You said your mother is in that hospital over there?" asked Ryan, pointing to the visible building in the distance, wanting to be sure before becoming completely involved. Emma turned to follow the direction Ryan was pointing and nodded vigorously. Her eyes, upon seeing the hospital, filled simultaneously with hope and terror. Hope that this man might help her, terror that it might be too late. She took a few anxious steps toward the hospital, as if every second standing still was an unbearable torture. Yes, she's there. Ryan looked again at the wallet in his hand, at the desperate girl in front of him, at the ruined doll, and finally at the distant hospital. Something was happening inside him, something that hadn't happened for a long time. A decision was forming, not based on cold calculations of cost-benefit or return on investment, but on something much more fundamental, something he had forgotten he still possessed: basic human compassion. His expression changed subtly, as if masks he had worn for years were beginning to fall one by one. "What's your name, little one?" asked Ryan, his voice now very different from the one he had used on the phone moments before, softer, gentler. Emma hesitated only for an instant, years of warnings from her mother about not talking to strangers, briefly conflicting with the desperate need for help. But there was something in this man's eyes now, something that wasn't there when he had bumped into her, a glimpse of humanity that encouraged her to trust. "Emma. My name is Emma, and my mommy's name is Claire." Ryan looked at his watch again. 2:55. 20 minutes. Then his eyes turned to the girl before him, small, vulnerable, desperate, but with an integrity that adults 10 times her age rarely demonstrated. He looked at the muddy doll in her arms, at her bare feet bruised from running on rough sidewalks, at her wet clothes clinging to her thin body. And finally, he looked at the hospital in the distance where a woman was fighting for her life for lack of a mere $22. The man seemed to awaken from a deep trance, as if something inside him had finally broken or perhaps been fixed. Then, to Emma's complete surprise, he extended his hand to her. "Come on, Emma, we have no time to lose." "Let's save your mother right now," said Ryan, his voice once cold and calculating now, carrying a warm urgency that Emma would never have imagined coming from such an imposing man. With her heart racing with renewed hope, Emma, in a sudden gesture, hugged the millionaire's legs. thank you," she said with tears now of joy bathing her face. Then she held Ryan's extended hand. Her small fingers disappeared into the man's large, firm palm. Together, they ran toward the hospital, Emma leading the way while clutching her muddy doll to her chest with her free arm. Her bare feet barely touched the ground, partly because she ran as fast as her legs would allow, partly because Ryan, noticing her difficulty, held her hand in a way that lifted her slightly with each step. "Faster, sir. The doctor said time is running out. My mummy can't sleep forever," begged Emma, her words interspersed with panting breaths as she ran with all her might. As they reached the hospital entrance, Ryan didn't slow his pace. With Emma still firmly holding his hand, he entered determinedly, heading directly to the reception desk. His imposing presence, expensive suit, and the expression of someone who wouldn't accept delays or obstacles meant he was attended to immediately. Emma watched in amazement how the adults who had previously ignored or dismissed her now moved quickly to meet this man's commands. "We need medication for Claire, this girl's mother. She was admitted approximately an hour ago with a severe infection. A doctor informed that she urgently needed specific medication," explained Ryan, his voice accustomed to giving orders in boardrooms now used to save a life. While a nurse verified the information on the computer, Emma persistently pulled at Ryan's jacket sleeve, her wide eyes fixed on the wall clock. The minute hand advanced mercilessly, reminding her that every second was precious. When the nurse finally confirmed Claire's location and the need for medication, Ryan was already taking money from his wallet. "The medication costs $22. Here's $200. The rest is to cover any additional treatment she might need." "Please take us to her immediately," instructed Ryan, placing the bills on the counter with an urgency that didn't match his apparent wealth. With a nurse now guiding them through the white antiseptic corridors, Emma felt her heart beating so hard it seemed to want to escape from her chest. The path to the room where her mother was seemed endless, each door they passed representing torture, for the girl who just wanted to reach her destination quickly. Ryan, sensing her anxiety, gently squeezed her hand, conveying silent reassurance. "Everything will be all right now, Emma. We arrived in time. Your mother will receive the medication and will be fine," assured Ryan, his voice strangely choked, as if he himself was surprised by the depth of his own emotion. When they finally entered the room, the scene they found made Emma momentarily freeze. Claire was lying in bed, paler than ever, connected to monitors that emitted increasingly weak and distant beeps. The doctor who had spoken to Emma earlier was beside the bed, a grave expression on his face as he checked vital signs. Seeing them enter, especially noticing Ryan with his imposing presence, the doctor seemed momentarily confused. "Doctor, I brought the money for my mommy's medicine. This gentleman is going to help us. Please give her the medicine now," exclaimed Emma, releasing Ryan's hand and running to the doctor, her eyes pleading for immediate action. The doctor looked from Emma to Ryan, who confirmed with a decisive nod. Without wasting any more time, the doctor called a nurse who was waiting for instructions and gave precise orders. In minutes that seemed eternal to Emma, the medication was brought and administered to Claire through the IV already connected to her arm. Emma watched every movement with absolute attention, as if her concentration could help the medicine work faster. "How long until we know if it worked, Doctor?" asked Ryan, placing a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder, who remained motionless beside the bed, her eyes fixed on her mother's inert face. "Soon, little one," the doctor replied. The following hours transformed into a silent vigil. Ryan, surprising himself, didn't leave the room. He cancelled meetings over the phone, delegated tasks to assistants, all without leaving Emma's side, who refused to move away from her mother. The girl eventually fell asleep, overcome by the physical and emotional exhaustion of the day, sitting in an armchair next to the bed, still holding her muddy doll. Ryan covered her with his jacket and remained awake, observing the two figures so fragile and yet so strong at the same time. What's happening to me? Why do I care so much about these two strangers? How did a small child and her doll manage to open a breach in this armor I built around myself? Ryan reflected, observing Emma's sleeping face, marked by dry trails of tears and dirt. In the early evening, as the hospital lights were dimmed to provide a calmer environment for patients, something began to change. Claire's vital signs gradually stabilized, her breathing becoming more regular, color slowly returning to her previously gray face. The doctor, who checked frequently, began to show cautious optimism. It was during one of these visits that Emma woke up, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was and why. "Your mother is responding well to the treatment, little one. The medication is working," the doctor informed with a genuine smile, the first that Emma had seen on his face since arriving at the hospital hours before. Emma approached the bed, hesitant, almost afraid to believe that the nightmare might be ending. Ryan remained a few steps behind, giving space for the moment, but his presence was like a safe anchor for Emma. The girl observed every small movement of her mother, the stronger rise and fall of her chest, fingers that occasionally moved slightly, eyelids that began to tremble as if struggling to open. "Mom? Can you hear me? It's me, Emma. I got the medicine for you, Mom." "Please wake up," Emma whispered, holding Claire's hand between her small ones, squeezing it gently, as if to transmit her presence. Yet, her mother still didn't respond. The minutes dragged on as Emma maintained her vigil, speaking softly to her mother, telling about her terrible day, about how she had tried to sell her doll, about how nobody wanted to help her, and finally, about the strange miracle of meeting Ryan. Gradually, as the night progressed, Claire's eyes began to open, first just narrow slits, then more widely, confused and disoriented, but undeniably alive. "Emma, my daughter, where are we?" Claire murmured, her voice weak and hoarse. But to Emma it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Emma's reaction was instantaneous and completely instinctive. With a cry of joy that could probably be heard throughout the floor, she threw herself upon her mother, hugging her with all the strength her small arms allowed. Tears of pure happiness flowed freely down her face as she repeated her mother's name like a prayer of thanks. Claire, still weak, managed to raise an arm to embrace her daughter, confused but deeply relieved to have her near. "Mom, you woke up." The doctor said you would wake up, but I was so scared. I thought you were going to sleep forever, but Mr. Ryan helped us." Emma spoke rapidly, words tumbling over each other in her rush to tell everything at once. At this moment, the doctor entered the room again, smiling at the scene of reunion between mother and daughter. He approached the bed and, with gentle gestures, checked Claire's vital signs, nodding with satisfaction at what he found. Emma watched every movement with intense attention, still firmly holding her mother's hand, as if fearing that by releasing it, she might lose her again. The medication was administered in time and is working perfectly. The infection has already begun to recede, and your vital signs are stabilizing rapidly. The complete treatment is already guaranteed, including the medication you will take home and the follow-up consultations, the doctor explained, his professional tone softened by genuine relief. Claire looked at the doctor with evident confusion on her pale face. The words "complete treatment" and "guaranteed" made no sense to someone who knew so well the financial difficulties they faced. Before she could express her confusion, the doctor continued, casting a respectful glance at Ryan, who remained quiet near the door. "Everything has been arranged by Mr. Ryan, a very important businessman in the city. He has ensured that you will receive the best possible treatment until your complete recovery," added the doctor, before discreetly leaving the room, leaving the family and their benefactor alone. It was only then that Claire truly noticed the presence of the elegant stranger standing near the door. Her eyes, still cloudy from illness, fixed on him with a mixture of confusion and incipient gratitude. Emma, noticing her mother's gaze, smiled broadly and excitedly pointed to Ryan. "Mom, this is Mr. Ryan. He helped me when no one else would. He paid for your medicine and stayed here with me the whole time waiting for you to wake up," explained Emma, her face lighting up with admiration as she looked at the man who, in just a few hours, had transformed from a hurried stranger into her personal savior. Unable to contain her gratitude and emotion, Emma let go of her mother and ran toward Ryan. Without hesitation or shyness, she threw her small arms around his legs, hugging him with all the strength she possessed. Ryan, visibly surprised by the spontaneous gesture, was momentarily speechless. Then, to the complete astonishment of Claire, who was watching the scene from the bed, Emma looked up, directly into Ryan's eyes, and said the words that would change the course of all their lives. "Thank you for saving my mommy, Daddy," said Emma, with the simplicity and sincerity that only a child can have, without understanding the weight and profound meaning that word carried. The room fell into complete silence for a few seconds. Claire from the bed looked with wide eyes, too shocked to react. Ryan seemed to have been struck by lightning, completely immobilized by the word Emma had just used. Then, in a slow and deliberate movement, he knelt down to be at the girl's height. His eyes, normally calculating and cold, now shining with an emotion he didn't even know he was still capable of feeling. "Emma, you are the bravest and most honest girl I've ever met," replied Ryan, his deep voice suddenly choked with emotion that he could no longer control or hide. On his knees, Ryan returned Emma's hug, embracing her gently as if she were made of the most precious crystal. For a long moment, they remained like this, a 5-year-old child and a powerful businessman, united by something much deeper than the circumstances that had brought them together. Claire observed the scene from the bed, her eyes brimming with tears she couldn't fully explain. Gratitude, confusion, hope, all mixed in an emotional whirlwind. "I'm sorry, sir. She doesn't know what she's saying." "The fever must have confused her," Claire finally said, her voice still weak from illness when she managed to find words. Ryan rose slowly, still keeping a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. His eyes met Claire's, and something inexplicable passed between them. A kind of recognition, an instant connection that transcended words or rational explanations. For a moment that seemed to extend indefinitely. They just looked at each other, as if each saw in the other something they had been looking for, without knowing. There's no need for apologies. "Emma has taught me more today about courage, honesty, and love than I've learned in my entire adult life," replied Ryan, his voice serious but gentle. With Emma still by his side, Ryan approached the bed and began to explain the extraordinary events of that day. How he had bumped into the girl, causing her doll to fall in the mud. How she, instead of taking advantage of the situation when he dropped his wallet, had run after him to return it, even though she was desperate for money to save her mother. How her honesty and unconditional love for her mother had deeply touched him, awakening something he thought he had lost forever. "Your daughter could have taken the money she needed from my wallet, and I would never have known." No one would blame her considering the circumstances, but she chose honesty, even when it could have cost her mother's life. "That is something extraordinary," concluded Ryan, his admiration evident in every word. Weeks passed, and Claire recovered with a speed that surprised even the doctors. Ryan had become a constant presence in the hospital room, bringing home-cooked food that he had specially prepared for them, colorful books for Emma, and talking at length with Claire during the hours when Emma slept. He and Claire became close, talking about everything, and each day their eyes lingered longer as they looked at each other. There was something gradually growing between them. A trust and intimacy developed between the two, as if they were pieces of a puzzle that finally found their correct places. "Mom, Mr. Ryan said he's going to take us home tomorrow when you're discharged. He has a big, shiny car," Emma exclaimed excitedly on the afternoon of the last day of hospitalization, jumping around the bed, where Claire, now sitting up with healthy color in her cheeks, smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. The next morning, while Claire was finishing packing the few things they had at the hospital, the door of the room opened to reveal Ryan, impeccably dressed as always, but this time carrying a colorful gift box. Emma, who was helping her mother fold some clothes, turned at the sound of the door, and her face lit up with a smile that could outshine the sun. "Mr. Ryan, did you bring a present?" asked Emma, her big eyes fixed on the colorful box, excitement barely contained in her little voice. Ryan smiled, a genuine smile that completely transformed his previously always serious face, and handed the box to Emma. With almost reverent care, the girl untied the ribbon and opened the lid. Her eyes widened in complete amazement when she saw what was inside, a new doll, almost identical to her ruined rag doll, but clean and perfect. Every detail had been carefully recreated, from the colorful little dress to the buttons that formed the eyes. "It's just like my doll. How did you manage to do this?" asked Emma in wonder, taking the doll carefully out of the box as if it were the most precious of treasures. Ryan knelt again to be at Emma's height, his eyes shining with a light that Claire had never seen in an adult, looking at a child who wasn't their own. There was a fondness, a tenderness there that spoke of deep feelings that transcended the brief time of their acquaintance. "There's one small difference, Emma. This doll has a special pocket sewn into the dress. Why don't you see what's inside?" Ryan suggested softly, his eyes briefly meeting Claire's, who was watching the scene with a mixture of curiosity and growing emotion. With careful fingers, Emma found the small pocket discreetly sewn into the doll's dress. Opening it, her eyes widened even more when she found a small shiny object, a delicate ring with a stone that sparkled even under the soft light of the hospital room. With the ring was a small folded piece of paper. Confused, Emma looked at Ryan and then at her mother, holding the ring and paper without fully understanding the meaning. "What does the paper say, Mommy?" asked Emma, handing the note to Claire, who took it with trembling hands, sensing that something deeply significant was about to happen. Claire unfolded the paper and read the words written in elegant handwriting. "To begin our family. You've given me something all my money could never buy, a new heart. Will you marry me?" Her eyes rose from the paper to meet Ryan's, who was now standing beside the bed, an expression of vulnerability and hope on his usually composed face. Time seemed to have stopped in that small hospital room. Emma looked from her mother to Ryan and back to her mother, not completely understanding what was happening, but feeling that something important and wonderful was being born there. Claire, with tears shining in her eyes, slowly extended her hand to Ryan, who took it in his, the ring now passing from Emma's small fingers to Claire's finger, sealing. "Yes, Ryan, I will marry you." "We also found something we never thought we would have again, a future full of hope," she answered, with tears in her eyes. And so, a new family was born, united by a promise that had begun with an accidental bump and a doll fallen in the mud. Did you like this story? Comment where you're from, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. Don't forget to comment. I'll see you there.